All right, so let's go through these real quick. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time on this. Again, I want to spend most of my time hearing from you. But I think this quiz it's important because I was even surprised by some of them. But the first one, how many of you said in this first question, healthcare would be the top issue? A few? So I would ask you, if you put healthcare, put a check mark by it. If you put something other than healthcare, just put an X. And at the end of this, we're going to add them all up and see how we did. Question 2, gross domestic product is an economic term that measures the size of America's economy in dollars. As you may know, the United States carries a national debt. By the end of 2012, the total federal debt is projected to be approximately 500%. Number 3, in 2010, the U.S. government borrowed about 40 cents of every dollar we spent. Number 4, in 2010, what was the total amount of the federal deficit? Just 1 year budget, 2010, 1.5 trillion. I'm going to go to questions right after. We're just going to go through this quick. Number 5, according to the White House Office of Management and Budget, waste, fraud, and abuse accounted for approximately how much of the 2009 federal budget, which is total $3.1 trillion? 100 billion. Number 6, eliminating all of the waste, fraud, and abuse reported by the White House Office of Management and Budget would cut what percentage of the $1.5 trillion deficit? 7%. If we were to cut all earmarks and pork barrel spending from the budget, how much of it would we save? 17 billion. True or false? If we rolled back Bush tax cuts for all Americans, we could balance the budget? False. Number 9, the top 1% of all wage earners in America pay about 38% of all personal income taxes collected by the federal government. And number 10, the top 10% of all wage earners in America pay about 70% of all personal income taxes collected. Number 11, what percentage of Americans currently pay no personal income tax? 47%. Number 12, in 1965, when Medicare was created, which of the following was the average life expectancy for an American according to the U.S. Center of Disease and Control? 70. And number 13, today in 2011, what is the average life expectancy for an American according to the U.S. Census Bureau? 79. According to the American Medical Association, nearly 31% of primary physicians already limit the Medicare patients in their practices. I hear this a lot from doctors all around the valley. It might actually be higher in the valley. It's a national number, but 31%. Number 15, in 1940, there were 159 workers for each Social Security beneficiary. As of 2009, there are 3. For every 3 workers, there's 1 person on Social Security. Number 16, the last one, true or false? President Obama's budget, by the White House's own projections, will accumulate more debt by 2020 than every president in American history. True. All right, let's tally them up. How many think they did really well? We got some? All right. Who got 16 right? Anybody get a perfect score? 15? 14? I see some people in this audience that I hear from a lot that I know they really pay attention to politics. How about 12? Got one? 12? All right. You realize that 12 is 75%. That's a C. But you still did better than anybody else in the room. Who got 50%? 50? Let me ask just 2 more questions. Who here did better than you expected? Show of hands. How many people are worried by these facts? Me. I am too. You know, I knew it was bad before I got there. I knew that the spending was too high. I knew that our debt was too high. I am concerned as a parent. Let me introduce my kids. Austin is a sophomore. Raise your hand. Stand up, Austin. And my daughter Samantha, she's an 8th grader. I think it's important for them to see exactly what's happening in our community and across the nation too, so I'm glad they're here tonight. I don't want to be the generation, first generation that doesn't leave our country in a better place than it was left for me. I had opportunities. I had opportunities to start a business. Well, I started out of college, paid my way through college, served in the military. I also was able to start a business in this country. I don't know that same situation is going to be there for my kids. I'm concerned. A $14 trillion deficit that's going to $16 trillion. I don't care which side you're on in the political spectrum, that is an issue that Americans have to deal with. We have to have real-world solutions. We've got to come up with the answers, pull both parties together to solve this right now. And I know right now one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight is gridlock. There's a lot of people talking about how partisan it is, the challenges that we're facing as a nation. We just had the State of the Union. And you can certainly see on a lot of the big picture issues, it is polarizing. When it comes to budgets, it has been very polarizing. We haven't had a budget in over 1,000 days. Even when Democrats had control of both houses and the presidency, there was still no budget that came out of the Senate. That's not a Republican or Democrat issue. That's an issue with the Senate. The president proposed a budget last year. The Senate killed it. The House proposed a budget. The Senate killed that. Look, we can talk about the partisan differences, but if we don't have the two houses working together, at least sharing ideas, you can't say that the House is a bunch of obstructionists if we're actually sending things to the Senate and getting nothing in return. So we do have some real challenges that we've got to get through. I will tell you from a Valley perspective, I'm encouraged that your Valley delegation, I feel, is working well together. We've got to move the Valley forward, we're going to have to work together to solve our Valley's problems. Water. We can't solve our unemployment issue until we address water. Our agriculture industry is going to continue to be our #1 industry, but we have to have certainty within agriculture, and water is that piece of certainty. So that's one way where the Valley delegation, Republicans and Democrats, have had to come together and then broaden that coalition across the state. Because we're still one state with 49 others that say, California, why can't you figure out your problem? So we've got some challenges ahead of us within our own economy, and I do have a bill dealing with one new water project up on Exchequer Dam. Dennis Cardoza, the congressman to the south, he and I are working on it together. Jerry McNerney and I are working on solar fields together. Jim Costa is working with us on the whole water issue. We're going to have a bill that's coming out of the House here in a couple more weeks. But I use those just as examples to show that there are important issues that we've got to get your Valley delegation to work together. There's still going to be some challenges during campaigns, and obviously this is an election year, but you elect us to get something done. And so I take that very serious in getting us both, getting all of us to work together to solve a lot of these problems. On the job front, one of the things you're going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks, you may have heard radio ads. There's radio ads to call my office about truck weight fees and lengths. That's because the highway bill is coming. Highway bill, we haven't had one in quite some time. We have a bill that's coming out of the House. I'm on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, so my bill dealing with building a new dam, new water storage, goes out of Transportation and Infrastructure, but also highways. The FAA bill, which we finally got a bipartisan agreement on, that's going to be moving forward next week. But the highway bill itself, we've proposed now a 5-year bill dealing with not only the current gas tax revenues, which is not enough to fix our problems or to keep with consistent funding. And so we actually figured an ongoing funding. We have new oil revenues coming in just with what we have today. not future. I mean, there are things that I want to push that I think we need more oil, we need more energy independence, we need more natural gas. But what we have today, we want to secure those oil revenues to pay for it's a strong nexus between the cars on the roads, and we want to utilize that to pay for a 5-year highway bill. So that's one way I believe that we're going to be able to create jobs here in the Valley. The way that we've structured the bill, there are no earmarks. The bridge to nowhere, things like that, the earmarks where you sell your vote to try to get something on there, none of that in this bill. This bill is based on a block grant to the states. It's going to be divided up based on the amount of need and the amount of money that we've had typically in the last annual appropriation for highways. And this will actually be a block grant to the state. Now, for California, I think it's a great thing because we're not just taking a pot of money and giving it to Jerry Brown and saying, spend it as you will. Do what you want down in LA or San Francisco. Put it more on bike paths. This actually says it's got to go to highways. We've got to do it on the STIP process, which is a competitive process in California. Republicans and Democrats in California agree it's a great process. In fact, it's one of the great things that actually other states are complimenting us and looking at taking over that same way of proposing projects. So when it's prioritized in the STIP program, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here because I want to certainly invite questions, but I think this is an important thing. So the STIP process allows our Valley COGs to come together and say, what are the priorities of the Valley? What are the shovel-ready projects that if the federal government has funding that we actually can put a shovel in the ground tomorrow and start moving some of this dirt and getting people back to work? So we've got a list of priorities in the Valley where your Valley COGs at each county has come together and said, these are our priorities. Here's the local matching funds, here are the state matching funds, and now with a 5-year bill, this will be the federal matching funds so we can actually move things forward. So while other states are getting a block grant and a pool of money and then have to decide where they're going to spend that money, California, I think, will be able to take advantage of a program that we've already got in place that prioritizes all of our funding. And you can go, very transparent process, you can go online and see which projects in our community are number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you don't like it, then you can take that right to your county COG or to your board of supervisors and say, look, this is really important. Let's see what we can do to move it up. Or if the project just isn't ready yet, then it really gives you an opportunity to see how each of them perform on a priority list throughout the state. Just want to touch on one other thing. A lot is talked about creating efficiencies in government, cutting back waste. The president recently came out with a proposal to combine different agencies. I look forward to seeing that proposal. I think that it would be good to combine different agencies to cut, a lot of the duplication, cut a lot of the mixed answers that you get when you may be following the process and one agency tells you one thing, another agency tells you another, and you just can't move forward as a business or as a maybe a project in your neighborhood. We need to combine as many agencies as possible to streamline government. But one of the things I'm working on that I'm very proud of, that I'm going to continue to work on and have worked on in the past, is selling off a lot of things that we just don't need. When I was in the state Senate, I came in at a pretty controversial time when Republicans said we got to cut across the board, and Democrats said that we needed this big tax increase. And I looked at it and said, what do we own? In my business, I've got to decide, we go through tough times. Do you borrow against your assets? Do you run a second shift? Do you sell off some of your equipment? But you've got a balance sheet, and you know what you own. You know what your assets are before you go to the bank and borrow more money. They want to know what your net worth is. But as a state, we had no list. We had no idea what we owned. Not by agency or department or even as a state. So one of the things that I worked on and passed during my final years in the state Senate was taking everything under the Department of General Services. So we at least had one list. And now we can start making decisions and prioritizing and at least provide political pressure to get rid of some of the things that we don't need. We've got empty buildings as a state. There are other things that we ought to look at and see whether or not they're being useful. San Quentin is a $2 billion piece of property on oceanfront property. You could build 4 new prisons for that. But at least gives us an opportunity to start asking these questions. The LA Coliseum and Sports Arena. I mean, those are fine buildings and probably a great thing for LA, but that doesn't do a whole lot for the people in my community. They're subsidizing that. So I think that we need to be able to get rid of some of the things that we don't need and start really prioritizing and asking questions. That's why I took it all in the Department of General Services. Now the state still has a long way to go. They've got a lot of things that they could sell, and they certainly have a lot of things that they can do with many of those properties. But I noticed when I first got into office, the federal government is even worse, with no accountability. Departments have run wild for quite some time, and it's a land grab. One department says, finally, we don't need something, and another department holds it because maybe someday they may need it. And you've got agencies going out and securing huge multi-billion-dollar leases without having the employees to fill them. We've got the LA courthouse, something that I've been very vocal on. We're going to spend $400 million on a courthouse that has less judges than was when it was originally proposed 20 years ago. Now, I want to create jobs in LA too. But shouldn't we either build something by the government and get rid of a lot of the lease space that we have in LA? We have a million square feet of space that we lease for the federal government. Wouldn't you at least build a building and move those people? I'd rather actually see it go to private industry. We've got a lot of different private companies that will go in, create jobs today, build on that property, and then provide those jobs, ongoing jobs, after the fact in the LA area. That's just one building. The courthouse in Miami sits vacant. In New York, they're building a huge courthouse, and they're going to divide all their courthouses into the new courthouse rather than moving people into it. I believe we can create efficiencies. And there are things that maybe we don't need to sell off, but we ought to redevelop. And the old post office in Washington, D.C., if you ever looked at pictures or you come to Washington, D.C., and you see it's one of the most historic buildings there. You look at the Washington Monument, and over to the right of it, there's this big clock tower that sits vacant. The clock doesn't light up. You're not allowed to go up in the tower because it's shut down. We spent $6.5 million just in that one property every single year just to maintain it. And for the last decade, they've been pushing to the point where my Democrat colleague, I chair the Committee on Economic Development, FEMA, and Public Buildings, and the ranking member, she finally had to push a bill to finally say this is the will of Congress to redevelop this one property. I mean, that's the kind of bureaucracy that we're dealing with. And then they still sat on it for several more years. So here's a building that costs us $6.5 million every year. And now that we put it out to bid, we've got Donald Trump, Waldorf Astoria, Marriott, a long number of clients that are coming in and want to redevelop it. Not only does that get us away from paying the $6.5 million, but it puts it back onto the tax rolls. And we receive, I think, about $25 million a year just in the redevelopment. Now, if you go to Washington, D.C., once this is done, you don't have to stay in the hotel or the new development or shop there. You can just go up there because we've taken a historic building, we've kept it historic, and we've actually created new income and jobs. 150 jobs in the construction and another 150 in ongoing jobs. I mean, that's not a Republican or Democrat issue. That's an issue of getting both parties to come together and say, let's just do things differently. There are going to be plenty of things that we can argue on. Let's find where we agree. This is an opportunity for us to agree on things and get rid of things that we just don't need. So I think that there's an opportunity to redevelop here locally in Modesto. We have the post office, still going to be a historic building. But now, with the efficiencies of the Postal Service and combining different agencies, we're going to be able to sell that off and actually reutilize that building again. I want to start right here at home. If we've got federal buildings that we can sell, I want to see the redevelopment here so that we create the jobs. But I want to also send this message, across the nation where we've got other opportunities to sell things. Right now, we have 14,000 properties that, under the current system, 14,000 properties that they've said we just don't need. No agency wants them. Things that we could sell off immediately. So one of the first things I did, I wanted to serve on this committee. I asked to be a chairman of the committee and was granted that last January. We held one of the first hearings outside of the Capitol in D.C. in the old post office to highlight that one building. And now we're highlighting buildings across the nation. The president, I talked to him about this issue early on. Last year in his State of the Union, he included it in his State of the Union. He's willing to push this issue forward, but it's a bipartisan issue that I expect not only to get it out of the House, which we're going to move it off the House floor in 2 weeks, but get it through the Senate and have it signed into law. I think the president looks at it as there's an opportunity for $15 billion in new revenue without raising taxes, just in the sale. Doesn't count the ongoing expense that we're going to be getting rid of, or the new tax revenue because it's actually going to be redeveloped. Just in selling the properties, we get $15 billion in new revenue. I look at it long term. If we now know how many employees we have and how many square feet we have across the nation, where you've got two agencies that may have 50% occupancy in a building, let's combine two and then get rid of the other building, or at least get people off of lease space. But now, by utilizing transparency, we can actually make better decisions. And so it's a BRAC-style commission like we had with our base realignment and closure. It's a Civilian Property Realignment Act. It's something I'd ask you to watch. It's just something I've worked very hard on, and something I believe will not only have an immediate impact in our budget, and something I think the President is going to be excited to sign into law, but it's something long-term that decades from now will help us to redefine government, and it's one way to help us reduce our debt. We're going to need a lot more of those, but it is one way to show that we're doing our part and at least making some steps. So with that, I got a lot that I'd like to talk about tonight. This isn't for that. This is for you. I want to hear from you tonight. I'd rather spend more time answering questions, and if we don't have any questions, I can talk for a long time. But I know you didn't come to hear from me. I want to hear from you. Why don't we start with the microphones? Before we do, my staff hates it when I do this because I got to go vote tomorrow. But this isn't my voting card. This is your voting card. I take that very serious. Every day that I go to the floor and I vote, I put this into the card reader all over the House side. When we go to vote, you hit yay or nay. I put this in there, and that shows how I'm going to vote for my community. I just want to pass this around, let you see it. I would ask that I get it back. I'm gonna need it tomorrow, but I just want to share that with you. Let's start with questions, but before we raise hands, one thing I always like to do, who came from further than Modesto today? Further than Turlock. Anybody outside of Stanislaus County, except for these gentlemen in front? All right, how many miles did you travel today?
From Sacramento.
Sacramento? How about back here?
Rancho Marietta.
That's further. All right, let's start back there. I think if you spent the time to come here from the furthest, you ought to be able to get the first question. We put a priority on that, and I thank you for your commitment to coming this far today.
Well, thank you. You said you're working with your water project.
Mm-hmm.
The big problem that you've had.
Ethan, is that on?
No, it's not on.
How are you doing with the water project?
We have two different things. I've got a water project that deals with Merced Irrigation District up in Mariposa County. We're going to put up a new dam that during wet years we'll be able to store more water. It is the least controversial of water projects in the state. It's a smaller project, but it's something that will help out the valley. We've got valley support on it. Republicans and Democrats have co-authored it together. We already had our 2 hearings. That'll be up on the floor here within the next month. I'm working with our colleagues in the Senate to get it done. I'm hopeful that we get it passed. If we can't get this one passed, we're in trouble. You know, I know that Sites and Los Vaqueros and Temperance Flat are all ready to go. We need big water storage. We need to be bold in looking at our state's future. But this is one small water project that's completely paid by water users. They have the money there, no expense to taxpayers, and so I'm hopeful that it gets done and gets done quickly. There's also another bill moving right now that deals with water regulations so that we can actually revert back to our older states' water rights, and so that we can actually move with greater certainty water in wet years.
I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you for staying on top of that for farmers there.
Absolutely. You know, we had a good year last year. We had a lot of rainfall, and now we've got a dry year. You know, we need to make sure that during dry years we've been good stewards and actually saved some of the water. You know, that's making sure that it goes back into our water table. It's doing off-stream storage. there ought to be opportunities without going through a lot of the environmental regulation or without battling the state to get off-stream storage. And I think that we've got to do both. We need to have both a short-term and a long-term, as well as a conveyance issue that allows our farmers the opportunity to know every single year before they go to the bank, before they go out and hire people, they know what kind of crops they can put in the ground. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about the Transportation Committee, and I understand that when the bill comes up this week, that it actually is going to cut bicycle and pedestrian funding. And it seems to me that that's one thing that we in the Valley desperately need, especially people, seniors and young people who may not have access to other forms of transportation. And I understand that there may be an amendment coming up that would restore that funding, and I was wondering if you would be voting yes for that.
It depends on what the amendment looks like and whether or not it is part of the utilizing gas tax dollars. I believe very fundamentally our gas tax dollars should go back to our roads. I mean, that's what's tearing up our roads is our cars and our goods movement. And if you're putting gas in your tank and getting taxed on that, that's where that should go. Certainly there's, we need to be conscious of our bike paths in our communities and, the trails within our national forest, and that should be paid for differently. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that amendment works. Again, we're block granting this to the state for the STIP funds, but that doesn't say that, as a state, the governor can't prioritize what he feels right, whether it's rail, light rail, or bike paths. It's just a separate funding bill.
And I just add that since our cars that we all drive, we're also creating our own air pollution here in the valley, and it sure would help if more of us could be walking and biking. So it seems like that would be a good use of gas.
Most of our air pollution comes from the Bay Area.
Actually,
It blows over from the Bay Area. We're in the valley.
And I would just ask, I know there's a lot of different views here, and you guys can continue the conversation way after I go, but I want to hear from you and answer questions. Again, I like to try to answer as many as we can, and so if we can all be civil, and I know that there's you have huge concerns, and so let's try to get to all of them.
Hello?
We'll go here next. We'll go here next, and then over here.
I was wondering what your ideas are to reduce the costs of Medicare.
A number of different things. I got to tell you, one of the most frustrating things that I've seen so far, again, there's going to be partisan fights, and that's disappointing. We came in, we knew Medicare was broke. I mean, you didn't have to go through a quiz like this or see the statistics. We know that Medicare is broke today, and it is going bankrupt and going to fall apart. That's not a Republican issue. Democrats understand it. The Senate knows it. The House knows it. The President knows it. The question is, who's actually going to address it? And I'm proud that we did put together a budget. It was one of the first things that we did. It was part of our pledge to America, was doing a balanced budget and dealing with Medicare in that process. The bill that we passed over to the Senate is still sitting there today. Again, I would say, hey, if you don't like the bill, send us back an idea. But if you can agree that there's a problem, and we can agree that there's a problem, you got to at least throw a solution back so that we can start debating and figuring out and give the American public an opportunity to be a part of this debate and decide what the best path to go forward is. But let me explain the one plan that we did pass over to the Senate. If you're 55 or older, there is absolutely no change in Medicare. If you're 55 and over, absolutely no change whatsoever. If you're under 55, though, I'm under 55, I'm going to pay more. And I realize that. I would rather pay more now than, my kids will never have a Medicare. It'll be gone, it'll be broke by then, and they'll have paid into something that is not a safety net for them. I think that all of America needs a safety net, and we've got to have a plan to be able to address that. So that's one idea. There are others I would hope that will come out over the course of this year, but as you know, that this is a campaign year, and so some of those ideas are being stifled. But that is one plan that we already voted on, that we already passed over. The flip side, and another challenge to Medicare is, before I got there, the House and the President, they passed the president's plan on health care. That took $500 billion out of Medicare. That accelerated how quickly it's going to go broke. And so we've got to put that money back in. We've got to make Medicare whole. That's a commitment we need to have, not only to our seniors, that's a commitment we need to have to our kids. Because someday they need to be ready to have that same type of safety. Yes, sir. And I promise, I'm going to try not to get long-winded on these answers, so I will try to give you as detailed. And if I don't answer a question in as much detail as you would like, ask me again, and I'll go into